Hello, welcome to the Chemistry World Book Club podcast. I'm Katrina, Chemistry World science correspondent and also your book club host. This time we talk about Ainissa Ramirez's The Alchemy of Us, How Humans and Matter Transformed One Another. This time I'm joined by Jen and Philip. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
I'm Jen and I'm the RSC content editor for Chemistry World.
I'm Philip and I'm the business editor for the magazine.
Fantastic. Jen, you wrote the review for Chemistry World. Could you tell me a little bit what the book is about?
Yeah, so The Alchemy of Us, it's a collection of stories and each chapter focuses on a different invention. So there's clocks, photographic film, light bulbs, silicon discs. And Ramirez looks behind those inventions. She's trying to find the untold stories, the under the radar characters, and she's looking at the motivations and personal situations that helped them become a piece of the story for that invention. Mm-hmm. And it shows that an invention is very rarely down to a single person, and how things happen. They happen over time, and the stories to get there, they're not linear stories. And her motivation for doing this is because when she was studying material science, she found it really impenetrable, and she doesn't want others to suffer, and she wants others to see the wonder, she says, and to see the stories. And also by talking about lots of different characters, she hopes that people can maybe see themselves becoming part of the narrative behind an invention.
So what were your kind of first impressions of the book? Because when I read the title, I thought it would be something quite different. I thought it would be very philosophical. So I was kind of pleasantly surprised, to be honest, that it was really focused on, as you said, people's stories. So what were your kind of first impressions?
Yeah, I had the same thing. I, like you, thought it'd be more philosophical. I guess because on Book Club, we've read a few more philosophical books as well. I expected there to maybe be a bit more analysis behind things. It's quite subtle. She's using the stories to explain everything, really. I did enjoy the book, and I like that there's lots of stories in there that, you know, I'd never heard of. There's people I'd never heard of. There's just things I'd never thought of before. But sometimes I felt that I just wanted a little bit more.
Philip, what did you make of the book?
I like it. I really like it. The thing that I like is that it isn't just about the inventions themselves. It takes it that little step further and say, how did this change the world? How did it change the way that we as people behave to one another, and just generally things like, you know, how railways, by making it possible to travel long distances or send messages long distances, change the way people think about the world, and things like and equally the telegraph, allowing messages to transmit almost instantaneously across the country, completely changed the way people consume information. So it's the stories like that's where the alchemy bit comes in, I guess, and that's it's how these inventions completely changed our behavior, even to the point of, when we talk about silicon chips, rewiring our brains, changing the way that we think and store and use information. It's less about having the information there to recall and more about knowing where we can find it, which is a huge fundamental change in the way that we consume information.
Absolutely.
Enabled by this invention of the silicon chip.
Mm-hmm. What about the science in the book? What did you think of that? Because it is a popular science book after all.
I think there's a good balance between, there's enough technical detail, and some of the stories, if you've read a lot of popular science or you're familiar with a lot, then some of those stories will be relatively familiar. But there are enough new ones that were new to me, certainly, to keep me interested, and there's enough technical detail to go, oh yeah, I can see how that works, or I can relate that to my existing chemical scientific knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I agree with Jen saying, like, she really manages to pick out the stories that are less well told or have never been told and that are really, really fascinating?
My favourite tidbits is talking about the phonograph and how, which is for picking up sound, and it says how cellos, violins and guitars produced tones too soft for the early phonograph to pick up. So louder instruments like pianos, banjos and xylophones and tubas were preferred for recordings. And could something like that have changed the music of the time? And I just find that absolutely fascinating, that link between science and culture.
I guess the only thing that was missing for me at that part, I wanted to know more. I was like, okay, so why didn't it pick it up? Give me more. Now I'm really curious.
I think there was sometimes I often went and looked things up afterwards. It was kind of like when, I don't know, you watch an episode of The Crown and afterwards you're straight on Wikipedia being like, well, I want to know more about this. But I guess that's what she wanted to do. She wanted to inspire readers to get more engrossed in the story and the science together, and that's what inspires you to learn more about a topic.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. There's no way that a book this size can have all of that information in it, and to my mind, if it's prompted you to go and look up some of that information, it's absolutely achieved what it should be doing.
Absolutely. So to find out more about the book, I called up Ainissa on Zoom the other day.
My name is Ainissa Ramirez, and I'm a materials scientist, and I'm the author of the book, The Alchemy of Us, How Humans and Matter Transform One Another, from the MIT Press.
I wanted to start off with a very simple question, like, why did you write this book?
Oh, that's a very good question. I'm a materials scientist, and I've been looking for a way to make material science interesting, compelling to other people. And there are many books that kind of talk about materials and what they do, but I really wanted to tell stories that were a little bit more broad and show materials in history and how they've impacted us. So that was the motivation, to show materials in a new way than just profiling the materials.
Fantastic. So I feel the story is very much about the human element of all of these materials. And I was wondering what it was like to find out about these stories. A lot of people might have heard of that might have been overlooked in the historic records a little bit.
Well, it was a lot of fun to go into the archives and to dive into finding these people. But sometimes I was a little frustrated because I found people who were so fascinating and they were hidden in history. And so I felt it was my duty to tell their story well, and to make sure that other people knew about it. So it was fun, but also I felt that I had a calling to make sure that these folks got a chance to get their moment in the sun.
Did it involve a lot of digging in the archives?
A lot of digging in the archives. I have a stack of different identification cards for all the memberships that I had to go to various archives. And also I had to go to the UK. I went to the British Library. I went to the library in Cambridge. I went to smaller archives all over the United States just to find these hidden stories, because they're not, you can't Google it. You have to really go back to the original materials to find these folks.
Fantastic. You have to go there in person. You can't just order.
No, archives are wonderful. There's a lot of information that's not on Google. Old newspapers, letters, handwritten effects, what people owned. They're in boxes in these dusty old places, and you just have to spend days and days combing through these materials and learning about the people and reading their old letters. It's a little personal, but you read a little bit about what they're thinking. But you really want to get to know who they were so that you can write about them authentically.
I don't know if you can recount maybe a little bit of your favorite story you found while writing the book.
One of my favorite stories was the discovery of Ruth Belleville. She's a woman who was from England, and she had this unusual job. She lived in the 19th century. She sold time. She would make her way over from Maidenhead to London to Greenwich and then walk up the hill to the Royal Observatory. And she would take her watch, which she nicknamed Arnold, give her watch to the attendant, and he would compare it to their main clock. And then she'd make her way down the hill, cross the Thames, go back over to London, and then she'd go over to different businesses and show her watch, and people would record the time. They would change their watches to make sure that they had the accurate time. And when I found her, she was just so fascinating. I had read so many books about timekeeping, and I have to say, honestly, that many of them were very, very dry. And I wanted to share how important timekeeping was to audiences, and I was just like, I'm in trouble. This is not going to work. But when I found Ruth, I was like, here it is. Here's my device to show how important timekeeping was, because a woman had a business based on it. And also, she's just so compelling. She seems like a book from fiction, but it's true. It's a woman who sold time.
Yeah, I thought it's kind of at the start of the book, and I very much like that story as well. Not just because it's a very unusual job, but also because I know that hill in Greenwich. It is very steep.
It's no joke. I actually went to Greenwich because I wanted to research it. And I said, this is a serious hill. And
I guess you probably, as I imagine, you found a lot of facts, people, things that ended up not being in the book. So is there anything you remember that you found particularly hard to cut out?
You know, you have to kill your darlings, as they say, and it all has to serve the book. So there are many things that didn't make it, and I just promised them. I said, look, you're not going to make the book, but I will find you a home. So, and I think they're okay. You know, I treat them like they're people at this point. I didn't want to do something that I found fascinating that didn't serve the story of the book. And so that's just part of the process. And that's a good thing. That means that you have a lot of great material.
So would these things go into a second edition, expanded edition, second book?
Well, let me mention that to my publisher. I think they'll just, I think they're smaller articles. And there's some things that are actually, you know, I'm sending into magazines. But I think for a book, it would have to serve a theme. And these didn't serve a newer theme.
So who should read this book? Who's it for?
Oh, well, this book is for people who like science, and maybe they don't do science. Just want to know a little bit about the world and want to know about the world in a new way. Scientists would like it because they're going to learn facts that they never knew before. But people who aren't necessarily scientists, or maybe you didn't even think science was for them, they're going to like the book because they're going to hear about stories and people that they've never understood or knew existed. And it's not a hard-hitting science book. The science is kind of peppered into the story. But I think it's going to have a broad range of people who would like it. Mm-hmm.
That was Ainissa Ramirez talking about The Alchemy of Us. So Jen, you already mentioned that you have like this favorite bit, but do you have like a favorite part, maybe a favorite chapter?
I really enjoyed the photography chapter. Mm-hmm. And it's great because she talks about someone wanting to photograph a horse to see if when they gallop, all of their feet are off the floor at the same time. And it's great because I'm like, well, does it? And luckily,
I mean, that is an absolute classic of sort of science and photography. It's great.
And it's great because she's got lots of pictures in there, which on the whole, I really liked having lots of pictures in there.
I only discovered that very late. There were pictures in there. I was like, oh my God, there are photos in there. This is excellent.
So yeah, the horse does at one point takes all 4 feet off the floor when it's galloping. Yeah, there's loads of little stories in the photography, but also about, I can't quite remember it, to do with taking Polaroids.
Ken Collins and Caroline Hunter at Polaroid.
I was actually going to show the picture that's in here, which is really lovely. So that's
discovering that the technology that the company has entered is effectively being used to control the lives of Black South Africans, and then campaigning against it. I mean, that's an insane story that I don't know how you would know about any other way, other than either having lived through it or have done some serious digging. But it's another one of these kind of unexpected consequences of the technology.
No, it's absolutely a story. I was like, why have I not heard of this before?
Exactly,
I should have definitely heard of this before. So would you recommend this book, and if so, to who?
Yeah, I'd recommend the book. It's easy to read, and you're going to learn stuff that you haven't learned from other books, like we've said.
Yeah, it's definitely I felt it was a very, nice, easy read. A little bit of science, but definitely, not enough to be like, oh, this gets very technical and now it's distracting me from the actual history, the actual story.
And it's very trans subject as well. It's not a chemistry book. I would definitely recommend it to anyone with a vague interest in science and technology, because it covers some chemistry in terms of the sort of silicon and glass, but also a lot of more physical or technological inventions as well. And then there's that little bit of psychology and human behavior there as well. So it's I think it brings together a lot of different things, and just you don't have any scientific background or knowledge to enjoy the book, because it's at its root, it's a book about human nature, really,
absolutely,
and how we behave and how we interact with the world around us. And that's something that I think a lot of people can be very interested by, and it's told in a way that is very accessible. So.
Absolutely. And she does have a chapter on glassware, which I thought was quite nice, because something that's quite often a little bit disregarded, because it's just a thing to do your experiments in, but nothing more. So I thought that was a very nice choice there.
It brought back some memories of editing Andrea Seller's classic kit columns on some of the same kind of equipment and technology, but told in a very different way. And it's important, but it is overlooked. Just like you would think about the steel of railways, they're just there, always have been. But at the time, the difference between iron rails and steel rails was a complete transformation.
So if you want to read something that combines history and material science into a very readable and enjoyable package, The Alchemy of Us by Ainissa Ramirez is published by MIT Press. It is also available as my favorite type of book, an audiobook. Next month, we actually do something a little bit different. So we'll take 3 different books on something that has been on all our minds lately, pandemics. And we'll discuss these 3 books. Each of us will read a different book, and we'll see what they each bring. Until then, bye!